With the closing of the Boston Biomedical Research Institute in Watertown this winter, and the industry reeling from a series of systemic changes over the last several years, the regional biotech community is left asking what's next. Today's guest, Steve Mannone, CEO of Mannone & Associates, may have the answer. Steve defines the tireless innovator and advocate for his industry. Mannone & Associates is a life science technology and commercialization solutions firm. Steve continues to look well into our future for the best way to deliver innovation to the world. For anyone in the life sciences or other innovation spheres interested in novel ways to put resources in the hands of the right people, this show is for you. Steve, welcome to the No Boundaries Radio Hour.
Thank you, Scott. I'm happy to be here.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Along for the ride here today is my tireless and fanatic co-host, Mr. Dennis Mannone.
Keeping us on track.
Keeping us on track and forever going. Double duties today, also acting as producer.
I wear many hats.
Yeah, not executive producer, but assistant.
Not executive producer. I'm not there yet. Maybe
third key grip. So, Steve, there's a lot for us to talk about here today, and I want you to begin by setting the stage for our listeners. Exactly what is this sort of sea change that's been occurring over the last several years and will continue to change throughout the life sciences industries?
Sure, Scott. So, with my background as a research scientist and having been in industry, I've gotten to watch this firsthand, this separation between what's happening on the commercialization side of the life science field and what's happening on the basic research side. And the impact, the economic impact, has caused there to be this increased rift between the transition point of basic research being transformed into products and therapeutics. So on the commercialization side, industrial companies have moved to do less of the research and development, less of the translational work, and focus more on the commercialization aspect of healthcare, marketing, and sales, and capitalizing on their infrastructure. Academia, which is where they've turned to for a lot of this research and development help, has actually really started to come to flat funding, almost even starting to become negative funding. So academic scientists are really focused with a dilemma called publish or perish, where their one focus is getting to their next publication so that they can get to their next grant, so that they can keep their paycheck coming. So they're not focused on the transformation of research into new therapeutics or products per se. And industry is really more looking to other places as opposed to doing it in-house. So this rift has grown and continues to grow as we continue to suffer economic difficulties, where the translation, and we'll use that word a lot today, the translation of basic research is where we have a falling off point. And that's the spot, the sweet spot, where we seek to introduce innovation to fast-track translation. I'll talk a little bit about why people have kind of shied away from the translation space as we go.
So, like a lot of other industries where intellectual property of one kind or another is the key facet, that's the currency. Basically, what we have is there's a lot of intellectual property that is not making it into the hands of the consumer in some sort of products that become useful on a mass market.
Sure. And if you can imagine a market perhaps that we're more familiar with, like, for example, electronics, you could have an intellectual property or a patent on a chip. But if that chip doesn't make its way into a cell phone or a computer or a television or something practical that you as the consumer can use, then that chip isn't going to go anywhere, right? So the same thing happens in science. If you look at advancements in stem cells, RNAi, nanotechnology, and I can expand on those, the practical applications of that basic research, we still have a long way to go to develop practical applications on a really wide or therapeutic level. So until we do that transformation process, that translation process of turning these inroads or insights that we've gleaned through basic research into a practical application that people can use, as you said, that intellectual property is just going to languish.
It's interesting too, the parallels, at least not so much in academia. I think the issue for academia in this transition is unique to the life sciences. On the corporate side, on the company side, there's parallels to other forms of intellectual property industries where essentially, right, and correct me if I am wrong, that you have companies that were active for so long in the R&D and the search for new innovation, new technologies that are now becoming little more than distribution houses and marketing houses for product. And so, so that essential element, the production and the generation of new intellectual property, is actually being taken out of the hands of the corporations and is going somewhere else, which is what we'll talk about a little bit later. Is that not true?
No,
it's okay. You can tell them if it's
you can tell me if I'm wrong.
My pharma friends are going to beat on me. No, that's by and large that's the case. And again, it's the case because
did it just get too expensive?
It's both expensive, time consuming, and there's an enormous amount of risk. So again, if you take the example of a stem cell, the potential for stem cells to do enormous beneficial good in the healthcare space is phenomenal, both from a unmet need and from a market value need. But going from what we know now about stem cells to where they can be practically applied in that way, we're not there yet. So for a company to say, okay, I'm going to make the investment, take the time and absorb the risk of taking this intellectual property, be it for a stem cell, and transform it into a therapeutic, they're shying away from that. And what they're looking more towards is the startup community who, because of the dynamics within startups to bootstrap and just overcome hurdles, they say we're going to allow some of that risk to be mitigated by a startup. And if it shows promise at a certain point, we'll partner with them, we'll license it from them, or we'll acquire it from them. But that's the pathway now that science is making its way out of academia and into the market, which is slow, stochastic, and as startup funding, early stage funding is also suffering, it even slows the process down even further. So
transfer the risk, but that's leaving sort of a vacuum of resources. And now academia's role in all this, essentially, and we were talking a little bit prior to recording here. We were talking about essentially the way that this expresses itself in academia is that basically it kind of becomes a black hole of information that's not necessarily being the first priority is not to have intellectual property make it out to business development to make it out to the market, and so a lot of potentially powerful information sort of languishes for a period of time instead of making it to the market. Am I right there? Or?
So this is the problem with having friends on both sides of the fence.
Yeah.
They're going to want to be.
See, I'm not politically correct, so I'm insensitive in that way.
So there again, I think you've absolutely hit it. That when you look at the deliverable in academia, the driver in academia, as an academic scientist, by and large, and again, I'm generalizing here, like I did with the industrial side. The drive is not necessarily to turn the stem cell into a therapeutic. The drive is to understand how the stem cell works so that it can enter into the transformation process. And what we don't know about stem cells and you name it, all kinds of things, there's still large gaps in information. So academic scientists are really more aligned or incentivized to work towards unraveling those more basic questions, which are great for our general pool of understanding. And it's really the shoulders that we stand on as translational scientists, because we couldn't do anything without the basic researchers really setting up the foundations.
They're the fundamentals.
Yeah. Absolutely. They're really, though, not incentivized and not really the group to be filling that translational space. And I think it's when you look at it as a process or a pipeline, every group has its special role to play. And I think that the gap is now taking place because the translational space, a group hasn't really emerged yet to fill that gap.
Is it just the risk that a college doesn't want to, that risk factor that if they took a stem cell, if they took a product from conception or understanding how that cell works to actually putting it into practical, they just don't want to be in the
Well, I don't think
hook for
academia
that.
has ever been in the translation business, really, have they?
Well, actually, in the last 2008 and probably 2005, 2003 set the stage, but 2008 is really when this started to take off. The NIH, going back to the desire of people to want to see their tax investment result in some therapeutic, quasi-mandated that research really start to have an applied slant to it. So you've seen these translational institutes, these translational initiatives spring up all over academia. So they're there and they're really pushing and they're really trying. But when you get down to the process and the deliverable of an academic scientist, you're not necessarily rewarded for the applied part. You're not necessarily rewarded for the patent or for the creation of a drug. And it's not that scientists don't work to those ends. Many of them do. But your grant, and this is how most of academic science is funded, is based in large part on your publication output. And you can't publish if you're waiting for a grant application to go in because that will impede that process. You can't publish if you're focused only on clinical things, unless you're a clinician, MD kind of researcher, MD, PhD. So if you find a stem cell that has a pathway that's considered hot, you want to publish it. And then you're going to mine that for where that pathway could interconnect with other things. And then that becomes another hot publication, and then so on and so forth. And your grant money keeps coming in and your research can continue. But you're not going to get a hot paper because you filed a patent. In fact, you really don't technically get anything for that. Because by and large, the universities claim most of the intellectual property.
It's sort of like being a studio musician. You get paid your hourly rate, and then you think, wow, I'm making really good money. And then the final product, it makes, millions. Potentially tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions for somebody else.
So again, I mean, the higher, overarching desire is, if we're working, for example, stem cells to neurological diseases, we're looking to affect Parkinson's and ALS and all of these other diseases. But we want to understand that from a fundamental process point of view. That's what we build on to get to the applied point of view.
So you're the bridge between the two to some extent?
Correct. So we would be applied scientists as compared to basic scientists. But the applied scientist, and I give total deference to the basic scientists, they set the stage. That's the shoulders that we stand on.
They do all the heavy lifting.
And it sounds like there's a lot of professionals in the sphere, scientists doing, just doing good research that need to start to in a prior market would have the anticipation of working for a large life science company. And of course, everything we're talking about, has its exceptions. But by and large, you can either look at this as an opportunity or you can look at it as, as a disappointment that you're going to come out of your academic sphere and now as never before there's a space in the entrepreneurial community for you. And in fact, that's probably where you're more than likely going to go, especially moving forward, that you're less likely to get that, in quotes, cushy job somewhere in a large corporate entity, and more likely to have to strike out on your own if in fact that's what you want to do, is help translate, an IP into market.
Well, believe it or not, I mean, these are still pretty insulated spaces. And part of what I do, in addition to the other hats that I wear, is I do quite a bit of mentoring and quite a bit of, outreach. And I give a seminar called You Are Your Own Startup. And I'm specifically speaking to this point that Scott brought up about using your expertise through an entrepreneurial pathway to bridge your science away from the research bench and into the market that needs it. But by and large, there's still quite a bit of that mentality that says, well, if I'm not happy with academia, or if I want to make a change, I will just go get that cushy. industry job. So that mindset's still there for a lot of my.
But are the jobs still there?
Absolutely not. And that's the part that I try to convey when I give this seminar, that, well, you might have a difficult time because supply and demand is
not
such.
always greener on the other side.
Absolutely not. And there are so many senior people looking for opportunities, willing to take whatever opportunity comes along, that unless you have a very, very niche expertise, it's going to be very difficult for you to break through that barrier. And the idea of pursuing an entrepreneurial pathway is still very far away from a lot of my colleagues.
Well, we've set the stage here for what will come up shortly in our next segment, which is exactly what Steve here sees as a potential solution to the issues confronting the life sciences community today and well into the future. We're very happy to have you here, Steve, on our show. We look forward to talking with you a little bit more. We're going to take a brief break here on the No Boundaries Radio Hour. Here we are back on the No Boundaries Radio Hour. Scott Graves, your co-host, along with my co-host, Dennis Mannone.
How are we doing, Scott?
I'm doing very well.
Just checking my numbers over here, making sure everything looks good on the board.
Dennis is double duty today. He is also the producer of the show today, and he's having fun with the computer over there. You're kind of a computer geek.
I am kind of a little geeky, yep.
You like the radio thing. It's cool, man.
Got all these flashing buttons.
Here with stuff. Lights, that's right. Here with our very special guest, Mr. Steve Mannone, CEO of Mannone & Associates. And we had set the stage earlier talking about where the life science community is at, both from an academic and a corporate standpoint. And Steve, let's now sort of launch into what you see as a potential solution. Well, I'll leave it at that. Let's start talking about your new efforts here that you've decided to launch here in 2013.
Sure, Scott. I actually should check my boards too to see if I still have any friends after that first part. But my solution essentially is a snapshot of my background. So my background is as an engineer and as a scientist. Two things that don't normally go together. In my mind, they go together perfectly well, right? Scientists need tools, and engineers are good at building tools. So my love for the research bench really never went away, despite the fact that I was working on the commercialization side. In 2009, we piloted an event series called Science Shaping Our World to focus exclusively on what was happening in academia, particularly in the translation side, because I still wanted to be plugged into that side of the fence, because that really is the wellspring from which the commercialization stuff comes from. And over the past 18 months, I've seen the convergence of technology that's really set the stage for this idea, this shift in how you can do science. And that shift is called the Helix Bioscience Institute, or HBI. And HBI was really envisioned as a way to do science, a third-party way to do science, if you want to take politics as an example. But while retaining the collaborative relationships and friendships from the industrial side and the academic side. So just by way of definition, translation is that process, that nebulous process by which we turn basic ideas, basic research, basic observations into a practically applied solution. And that's what I'm most attracted to. As an engineer, I want to build things, and I'm particularly passionate about biology, so I want to build biological things. So the Helix Bioscience Institute was envisioned to do that, to capture the classic research institute setting. So this is why it is a non-for-profit platform, and to interject into that a lot of engineering tools and resources that you don't normally see commingling with biology, namely mathematics, computation, a lot of modeling, predictive modeling, and real-time wet bench outsourcing, which I'll touch on a little bit further about what that is. The idea is that through this convergence of usually non-intermingled resources, the pain points of translation, which is the difficulty which it takes to turn basic ideas into applied technologies, products, and services, the time that it takes to do that, and the cost, the enormous cost, will be significantly truncated by applying these new tool sets, so that on the other end, we'll take basic research and transform it into applied solutions and or intellectual property that can make its way into the market and be picked up by small, medium, and large companies to be applied in a variety of ways. So the Helix Bioscience Institute, classic research institute, not-for-profit, doing translational research with the caveat that it is on a virtualized platform, utilizing a lot of technology, which I can break down individually and kind of make a case for why they all work well together, leading to an acceleration of translation.
So it's not just that the that HBI is going to sort of fill the void in the translation sphere within the life sciences, but that it'll actually be able to, as in your words, truncate the amount of time that traditionally this has taken as well. So it's not just that you're filling a space and offering a solution there, but the anticipation here is that it will, in a number of ways, actually be able to do that process better.
Correct.
Yeah. And there's a modicum of there's an online platform that is part of this whole process as well. But before we get into that, this is a nonprofit. So as a business formation, we'll talk about business formation here for a minute. You've chosen to form a legal entity that is a nonprofit versus a for-profit, and I'm interested to know what specific reasons you might have had for that.
So one of the things that I've seen with the tools that I'll get into that we're going to employ is that a lot of the technology tools have been disentangled or separated from the scientists or the subject matter experts in academia. So they really become less powerful when you separate the tools from the people who understand the biology the best. So one goal of the Institute was to re-entangle those two things, and we'll talk about how that's going to happen. But I wanted to create a platform that would be attractive to academic scientists. I wanted to create a platform where they could continue to pursue their academic career, where they could continue to publish, where they could continue to submit grants, and essentially have some of the familiarity that they were used to from academia be sort of the central rudder to HBI. I didn't want to make too many unknowns all at one time. I wanted there to be some familiarity so that scientists would say, okay, this is a little bit different, but it's not all different, with the idea of being able to bring them on board and to incentivize them to want to do translational research. So the structure that we envisioned creating, was designed or geared towards providing that familiarity to research scientists so that they would be incentivized to join us.
I was wondering, too, if it had anything to do with the fact that, in order to finance a project like this over a long period of time, if the nonprofit status actually had something to do with that, if there was a larger strategy for acquiring funds, not only by, obviously, there'd be some success with some intellectual property over time, and that could come back in the form of some sort of revenue, but also, to have some sort of a donor strategy.
I think that the near-term funding of a nonprofit with this kind of scope, or not just a nonprofit, of a new venture with this kind of scope.
Right, because there's a number of reasons why this is, needless to say, it's an unprecedented type of institution.
Correct. And we thought that we could leverage a lot of nonprofit geared incentives and resources that would not be available to us as a for-profit. But in the long view, the strategy is really that the independent scientists coming to the Institute bring with them not only research, but their own funding. And from that funding, the Institute will draw an indirect revenue or overhead cost or for operational expenses.
For having provided those resources.
Exactly like happens currently in academia, except we'll provide it at a much more competitive rate. So you get more bang for your scientific buck. So the goal was to bring researchers who were not going to be employees, but were going to be independently driven scientists. And this gets us to that open innovation platform, which is so popular right now. More so than I could ever possibly direct scientists A, B, and C to pursue some track. They're the ones who are better equipped, better experienced to say, if I'm already doing research on oncology, I'm going to follow or create my own research program, as opposed to Steve saying, well, I want you to look at this, this, and this. So that was the culture that we wanted to extract from academia. We want to keep that culture in place because it's those innovative minds that are going to be much better at coming up with translational solutions than we would as a for-profit, top-down kind of organization where everybody's
making business development decisions based strictly on market climate and all
just
that.
Just the conversation of being for-profit would be a little bit different than a non-profit. So just that alone would probably get your foot in the door or ease, working with people, versus being, having them kind of look.
Well, that's true too. Sure. Yeah, many scientists might feel better about just that sort of status from that standpoint, since they've been themselves largely working in or if they come from academia, they've been in a not-for-profit climate.
And more than that, though, they know the expectation, right? When you go work for pharma company X, the expectation is you're working for pharma company X, right?
I need these numbers at the end of the month.
Correct. But you're going to get a commensurate paycheck. You're going to be given direction and so on and so forth. When you're a new scientist at, University X, you're expected to be creative. You're expected to come up with your own funding. You're expected to create your own experimental programs. That's what we want, right? Mm-hmm. Because they can come up with ideas to a translational endpoint that, us as quote unquote management, we would just mess it up.
Yeah.
Well, and does the business side of the equation, because it's such, and Scott and I have had this discussion before, where it's so transactional and marginal that they're looking for the bottom line numbers, where somebody needs to be creative. It does take time to figure these things out. And on the business side, time is money. And they look at the bottom line versus academia says, it is going to take a year or 2 years, however long it takes to get there. We'll get there. There's different ways to get there, but we'll get there. And, I think that's the differentiator maybe between.
Well, that's an interesting topic. Time itself within the life sciences, isn't it?
Right. And this is where, now that I've, wow, and now I'm not going to be able to get anybody. Now that I've sucked them in,
we're just hitting all the avenues.
I hit them with this double whammy that, yes, you're going to be scientist a la an academic setting, but we have urgency, right? We have a timetable. We want to pursue an applied output, right? So this isn't basic research. This is applied research. This is translational science.
That's right.
So that's where now it starts to become a little bit different.
But you got the relationship, though, right?
Yeah, but the Institute, that's right.
That.
And the Institute has an expectation, since this is the translational sphere, that we do want to get this out to market. We want to do it right and properly, and there is an organic process to creativity. But all that having been said, you're fast tracking stuff, because that in and of itself, we said earlier, is part of the business plan. It's not just that you've created a new place for what needs to happen, but that you can actually speed up the process through a variety of either efficiencies or just different processes that will speed up the process, because as in all other industries, time is money, and in this case, it's also a tremendous amount of risk.
And this is where the dual culture that we seek to create, in that as a scientist, we want you to have the infrastructure to pursue a career that's fulfilling and successful, doing academic things. But as a translational institute, we want to equip you and push you to do science that has an applied endpoint. And this is, again, where really is going to fall on us to craft our message so we attract people who say, "Wow, that's a good idea. I like that aspect of it." So it is going to be a special type of researcher that's going to be attracted to this because it's entrepreneurial. It's risky. The expectations are different. It's a total paradigm shift from what you're used to. Either you're on one side of the fence of academia or the other side of the fence of industry. You're going to be the entrepreneurial kind of bridge point. But the goal at the end of the day is that the infrastructure facilitates the pulling of knowledge from one side and really laser focusing it towards the transformation process. And that's where it falls on us as management to create that infrastructure and that culture, so that the people we do attract not only feel that they're doing something that's positive and fulfilling, but it also becomes a viable career track, which is very important right now, since there is such an enormous glut of junior scientists just waiting for an opening to become, a first-tier independent scientist at a university. The extended training period, which is their fellowship, can now expand anywhere from 6 to 10 years. So your first independent grant is, I think now, on average, when you're 42-ish, 43-ish.
Wow.
That's when you start your career. So we want to offer an alternative track, which, again, won't be for everybody, but for those people that find it attractive, we want to really create a viable career track for them.
Inherent in what you've described in this segment, you seem to, and I think through probably no small measure, your experience as a research scientist has something to do with this. But you seem to have a clear bead, to say the least, on exactly who it is that you want to attract to this institute.
Absolutely. I have a short list.
I know I'm not on it.
but more in qualities. And again, we need all kinds of researchers. So we want diversity of research type. Right? So we want people who are going to work on infectious disease. We want people who are going to work on neurological diseases. We want people who are going to work on oncology. We want people who are going to work on a variety of different things. We want diversity of researcher. I think that's going to be very important. Myself being Latino, being an underrepresented minority in science, I could count on one hand the number of other Latino scientists that I know. So it's a very small group. And I think that having that diversity of perspective, when we're talking about therapeutics that now are being applied on a worldwide basis, using just one group as your test basis, your clinical test basis, really limits the way that therapeutic can be applied. And lots of times therapeutics fall by the wayside because in one group, they're not really very successful. They're not really very efficacious. But in another subgroup, they could have enormous impact. So diversity of researcher, I think, is going to be very important. And then just that entrepreneurial spirit, which, I think you both are quite familiar with, that ability to say, I see an opportunity, I'm willing to take a little risk, and I know how to aggregate resources to my benefit.
Which is so key with any entrepreneurial pursuit, but particularly in a technical field like the life sciences, to say the least. And especially where you're working with a lot of new technologies. I'll use nanotechnology as an example. You might have, some sort of fundamental molecule or piece of I'll use carbon nanotubes as an example. We haven't really quite figured out what applications this could have in just a variety of different industries. So it's sort of like we've had this breakthrough, this discovery, but it's just kind of there. I mean, I know that this is probably a bad example because it is actually currently being used in certain things, but we still have a long way to go to understanding not only how this product, this innovation can be used, but we also don't really know, because it hasn't been in existence on the planet for very long, what consequences, good or bad, it could have on people or other organisms and that kind of a thing. And it just sounds like this institute, by the way it works and the way it's going to bring together so many different people, that it's going to have real consequences on stuff like that.
Absolutely, and I think that you really hit on one of the first tenets of the Institute, which is data. Data is really at the heart of how we want to enable researchers, and exactly big, heterogeneous data sets. And by that I mean, if I'm a scientist working on cancer and you're a scientist working on infectious disease, the cells that are infecting people might have something in common with the cells that became cancerous. And somewhere within those commonalities, there might be a point that I could exploit as an oncology researcher, or you might be able to exploit as an infectious disease researcher to apply that knowledge in the form of a therapeutic. But I don't read your documents, your papers. I don't read your literature. I don't follow your field, and you don't probably follow mine because we're both very focused. So one of the central themes to how the Institute is going to accelerate this process will be correlation mining, will be big data mining to try to surface correlations where from a different field, connect the dots. So from a different field, a different time, we don't look at papers that are older than 3 or so years, 5 years at the absolute most. And that's only if you're looking for like how to make a buffer, which nobody really even makes anymore. You just buy them. But somewhere in that paper from 1950 could be a thread that shines a light on the thing that you're doing today. And you didn't read that paper, so you can't connect those dots. So we want to provide the tools, the data mining, the correlation tools to the scientists and the infrastructure to aggregate this data so that they could do this mining, surface relationships, and then they can say, okay, that relationship, that dot that we connected, we can leverage that dot to an applied endpoint. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of the first step.
And we're going to take a short break right now, but when we come back, we are going to actually focus on this idea that Steve is talking about. You're listening to Steve Mannone of Mannone & Associates. We are talking life sciences today on the No Boundaries Radio Hour. You are listening to the No Boundaries Radio Hour on the UR Business Network. And we're back here on the No Boundaries Radio Hour talking about the life sciences here in Massachusetts and beyond. I want to launch, Steve, right into, with our guest, Steve Mannone, I want to launch right into the actual physical platform that is being used to aggregate all of this data as part of the HBI Institute. I find, I'm a typical American in that vein, I suppose. Things that are big and massive and visionary are really kind of cool and sexy and whatnot. And,
I love big data.
And I please explain so that people both in and out of the life sciences vertical can understand exactly not only how it works and what it is, but the true consequences that it will have moving forward.
Sure. So the Institute is envisioned to be a blended virtual brick and mortar. And the virtual piece comes in very much the way we've all become very used to LinkedIn, Facebook, and a lot of these online tools. So imagine a canvas or a digital palette like a LinkedIn, like a Facebook. Behind it, strategic partners that are supporting us that span everything from IT to computation to predictive modeling. They're providing the infrastructure into which we're going to pour the data and build the tool sets. Scientists will then come in, get their coffee, log into their portal, and then they'll start to mine the data using the tools that are provided to them. And the tools are going to be iterative. As new strategic partners come in, they bring in new tools. We make them available to the researchers with the appropriate training and support so that they can actually make use of the data. And this is one of the key caveats to big data. It's huge. It's getting bigger. What do we do with it?
Right.
That's the big
question. How do we
question.
manage it?
What do we do with it so that it becomes something of value? So how do you look at data across different buckets and say, well, if this data is, a paper, a publication, and this data is a phenotype from some clinical study, and this data is some gene sequence, how do you look across those different buckets and find relationships that can be meaningful towards saying, oh, So A connects to B, connects to C. Now I figured out a way to start to translate that. So that's the process that we're going to be following at HBI, is aggregating these heterogeneous data sets, giving the researchers the tools that they need to find meaningful correlations, and then set them on the stage for translation. So that's phase one. Phase two, now they've got their dots. They've connected their dots. How are you going to test whether that translation leverage point is real or not?
Because in a normal setting, it could take weeks, months, if you have to gather the materials and or the apparatuses to perform that experiment.
Think of like years. So think about like long division, right? You got to do it all out. You've got a million different ways that you could go after this. And the only way you're going to know which is the right one is by doing all million experiments. Mm-hmm. So imagine that instead of doing that, using the power of predictive modeling, we could say, well, let's run all these scenarios on a computer and let the computer run through the experiments. We give the computer the assumptions, we give the computer the constraints, and we say, run through the scenarios. Computers can run through millions upon millions of scenarios and yield the ones with the highest potential fitness. And by fitness, I mean the ones that have the highest potential for success. Now we say, okay, let's take these 10. Those are the ones.
Versus 10 million.
Versus 10 million. Yeah. Those are the ones that we're going to test.
We're going to run in real time.
And the way we're going to test them is not by having a building full of equipment that sometimes get used, sometimes might not get used. We're going to test it by taking advantage of the enormous resource of laboratories in and around the area and worldwide, nationally and internationally, to outsource these experiments so that our scientists will have access to every single bit of scientific equipment, technology, reagents that they could possibly need. There's no way we could house that under one roof and own it and manage it and pay for it, which is the real problem.
Yeah, right.
But through the virtual laboratory exchange that's being brought to HBI through our strategic partnership, once the scientists have identified which candidates they want to pursue into the testing phase, they'll just stay logged in, pull down their experimental screen, pick which providers are going to do which experiments. Off it goes. The experiment gets done. It comes back. The data's in their lab book, and off they go. Now, if I can just take a moment. I was listening to another radio show. I know that's like a cardinal sin.
Oh,
another
no. We like other radio shows.
I won't say who it was, but they were talking about Scandinavian researchers who were charged with storing big data. So they're in a pub drinking beer. They're like, what are we going to do? This big data, it's expensive.
They weren't drinking vodka?
No, they were drinking beer.
Okay. So they weren't in Finland then, I guess.
No. And one looks to the other and says, DNA stores a lot of data. Why couldn't we store our data in DNA? So they had a couple more beers. They scratched some notes out on a napkin, went back to their lab, and figured out how to turn text into nucleotides to make DNA, right? Now, this is where it becomes relevant to HBI. They then sent that off to a DNA production facility. They didn't know anything about making DNA. They don't know anything about DNA prep, but they knew that they could outsource it to a DNA facility who took their information and made the DNA for them. Now, it came back in a little tube, and there was a little fleck at the bottom of the tube. That little fleck contained the entire works of Shakespeare, plus a whole lot of other very important speeches. So then they sent it off to another place to be sequenced because they wanted to read it back.
You want to be able to catalog it. Yeah.
Read back, error-free.
Wow.
Flawlessly error-free. Wow. And then they published it in Nature, and Nature's probably the preeminent publication space. So the point of this story is they did not have the facilities to make the data or to make the DNA, to sequence the DNA, to read out the DNA. Did that stop them? No. They had the idea. They figured out the translational process. Then they outsourced the rest of it. And now we're on the path to using DNA as a data storage tool. That's what we want to do at HBI. And when I heard that, that was just very reaffirming proof of concept.
That's a wonderful story. And I would also imagine, too, for labs that have highly specialized equipment or specialized processes and whatnot, that doing business long-term moving forward in this way is actually making all of those places more profitable.
Absolutely. And we want to be their next customer. We want to be the market that they go after. I believe that the impact that this approach can have on the economy locally, both to contract research organizations in and around the Massachusetts area, not to mention academic institutions through collaborations, is going to be phenomenal.
Using a big data platform like this, can you also once the experimentation has been done, you have results. Can you also then connect those results to any number of other cases that you normally, the scientists might not have previously read, or going back more than just a couple of years, to connect and ultimately come up with additional uses for the results that you normally would never have expected, and come back with all of these different, you could have any endless number of connections made that could lead to additional potential market use?
Well, that's part of the culture shift that we're hoping to introduce through this, because you can imagine as the data comes back, it comes back into a group who realize the power of this data mining, correlation, predictive modeling. So, we hope over time to add to the pool of all knowledge, not to the extent that basic research does, but exactly like what you're saying. For my particular endpoint or objective, the data that came back served its purpose, but then you might find a way to repurpose it for something that I hadn't even thought of. And because we're already plugged into this new process or this new culture of using data in this very proactive way, again, data that's not necessarily in our vertical or in our bucket per se,
right.
That's the shift. I hate this word, but the paradigm shift that we hope to bring about in the science space. Again, you're still an expert in your own field, right? That's the comfort zone, but you know how to use tools to increase the power of your own research.
Right. And those tools are making it possible to leverage information in a scalable and a usable way, in a useful way.
Correct.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is, I want to get into a little bit about how our local area is contributing to this, not only politically, but also the universities that we do have in our area, and then how that translates overseas as well, and where you see that going as well.
Sure. That's a great question. I am very fortunate as a scientist and somebody who's very passionate about science to live in the hub of all science, right? And not to disparage my West Coast friends, but we do live in the hub of all science right here in the Boston area. So the resources that span not just life sciences, but technology and computation, as evident by, some of the initiatives brought forward by the Patrick administration in the computing space, the Mass Life Science Center and their support of new life science innovations, and not to mention just the whole plethora of academic institutions and their collaborative desires to support translation. We could not be positioned in a better place for what we're trying to accomplish. With that said, though, we can see BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, just making enormous investments. Brazil, our closest neighbor, just making tremendous, enormous investments in infrastructure because they want to become the life science hub of South America. China, just enormous investment, not just on the manufacturing side, but they now want to be part of the innovation of the entrepreneurial process. They don't just want to insource stuff that they can manufacture. They want to be the nucleating site for new technologies. And then right behind that, you see revitalization of the African continent picking up the manufacturing and the outsourcing role that's currently being played by China and India. So on the horizon, those countries are going to be a competitive force. So I think that we're very well positioned And I still strongly believe we have a leadership position, but we have to be innovative, and we have to be creative, and we have to be aggressive and hungry, because these other countries are making significant inroads.
And it seems, especially in a country like China, where when a decision is made in China, there's not a lot of regulatory hurdles to make that action happen in a lot of ways, and so time again becomes that much more of either a hindrance, or you use time, leverage time to your advantage, and that's again, a key element to this institute is going to be being able to cut down on the time it takes to leverage information to get to a good result.
And that's correct to a certain extent. I mean, these countries all have their own infrastructure, and it's changing and it's growing, and the processes and rules that are being followed are very in a state of flux and evolution there. And I'll caveat my previous statement with, again, being in the hub of all things science. I'm very proud and passionate to be living here in the Boston area and doing science here. But unmet healthcare need is really a worldwide challenge. Infectious disease does not know borders or boundaries or cultures or ethnicities. So, if we all decided to become translational scientists tomorrow, the bugs would still have an advantage over us because they don't take any time off.
They've got a few 100,000 years or more on us.
Absolutely. So, I see collaborative opportunities as being more of a positive driver for us than competitive ones. But with that being said, we want to lead, and we want to lead from the front. That's where we are, right, in the Boston area. And that's the leadership position is what we're hoping to continue with this new foray into how science is done. Not at the exclusion of the rest of the world, but with a mindset that, we want to be a leader in this new transformation, which I can see it when I interact with colleagues from other places. I mean, they have a much more collaborative mindset than you might have thought of maybe 10 years ago.
So the culture is changing, however slowly, it's still changing.
Well, I think it is, particularly with the younger generation, because they're so interconnected with social media tools that, to a certain extent, there is sort of a sensation of a blended world. But again, I don't know if you watch a lot of the sci-fi, pandemic horror movies, but they're not very far from the truth. I mean, it really would not take very much to start a pandemic in one part of the world and have it eclipse the whole world very, very, very
well,
quickly.
I mean, this is part of our history. It just hasn't happened recently,
Correct.
Particularly here in the United States, at least for close to a century. But, the influenza pandemic of 1918, which was now we know is a bird flu, or I think we highly suspect that it was a bird flu, and all the different types of diseases that have been, some people think have been eradicated, but they're not eradicated. They're just underneath the surface. Or lying dormant. And there's, as of yet, other things probably lurking in a few concentrated animal feedlot operation manure lagoons that that haven't come to the surface yet because we haven't had, just the right accident. But, there are pathogens and all kinds of living organisms that we've either inadvertently created or that have been in nature that just haven't come into civilization yet.
Absolutely. And, I think that's where this idea of collaboration is really one of the most critical aspects of science and technology going forward. After science and engineering, history is probably one of my next greatest passions because what you can learn from exactly what you just said. Pandemics are a cyclical thing, and they're going to continue. And the question is, are we going to be prepared for the next big one, or are we not going to be?
There's a socio-political destabilization that occurs with pandemics like that I think if you can,
water, shelter, it all comes up to the forefront again.
Well, right, and the planet is not, our population worldwide is not getting smaller, it's getting larger. So all of this stuff is exacerbated by the fact that there's just more of us. And that, I think, also adds to the destabilization that occurs when you have a major natural, accident or issue to occur.
Oh, just look at the storms we've been having over the last 5 or 10 years where we're wiping out, cities, and we've got to get back, and we've got to get the infrastructure done, and it just takes time.
The disease, I think, has an entirely different, not just in scale, but it has an entirely different damaging effect, doesn't it? We take it for granted, but I can recall my grandparents that lived through the 1918 pandemic, that there was no family that wasn't touched in some way, shape, or form, and it in some cases dramatically changed people's lives. Not always for the better, mostly not for the better.
And I think that speaks exactly to the urgency that we started the conversation off with. Because if you look at where we are right now, particularly if we use infectious disease as an example, the emergence of antibiotic resistance, microbial resistance, has us moving closer and closer back to using sulfur drugs, because we haven't used them for a while, and that's the next best tool that we have. So I mean, it really speaks to the urgency of taking some of the newer insights and figuring out ways to leverage them. For example, I was just at a recent infectious disease conference where one of the new thought processes is not to necessarily kill the microorganism, which brings about the resistance, but to figure out ways to make them not virulent. Because the part that makes them dangerous is when they become virulent. So if we could suppress their virulent genes, they would not affect us in the same way. So that's the kind of stuff that we want to capitalize on and say, okay, the basic scientist, he or she figured out that one piece of it. Now how can we apply it and turn it into something we can use?
Never ending, it's fascinating to me, and its potential consequences on creating much more, at least in a professional industry, much more of a world family of people. I think, when we talk about destabilization, this is one of those things and opportunities we have as a global community to sort of reverse the effects of destabilization. If we're all truly working together like this on this level, and we're doing it in a variety of verticals, not just in the life sciences, then political instability, we can potentially have an effect on that too.
And if I could just touch on that, science becomes a great bridge for that. And I've not seen that in other verticals. The way I've seen it in science is having people from different countries and different backgrounds working collaboratively the way we do in academic research, particularly in the life sciences, which I find very inspiring. And
where America can be a leader, looked upon across the world as a leader in this space, versus we're a warmonger. We're seeing it in a different light of helping people, and I think that's important to always get out there.
So we end the day on humanity.
That's it. It all comes full circle, as it always does.
It's a nice, after talking pandemic, it's a nice place to end on a positive note. Steve, we want to thank you very much for coming in and speaking to us. Let's not,
is there a way to get in
forget
touch?
the fact that, oh, that's right. Before my last statement here, why don't you let the folks know how they can get in touch with you?
Sure. So the best way to get in touch with me is at our website, MannevarandAssociates.com. So www.MannevarAssociates.com. There you'll find all of our contact information. You can also Google search Helix Bioscience Institute. We currently have a funding campaign that's taking place in Rocket Hub. So if you go to Rocket Hub, www.rockethub.com, and search Helix Bioscience, we will appreciate all possible help in getting this off the ground. And very shortly, you'll be able to directly come to the Helix Bioscience Institute webpage, where you can join our newsletter, and we can keep you in touch with all of the happenings at HBI.
I'd remind our listeners as well that you can find out a lot more information on Steve and the Helix Bioscience Institute and Mannevar and Associates on our blog on the UR Business Network soon, as we broadcast the show as well. And with that, without further ado, thank you once again, Steve, for coming. Thank you, my co-host, Mr. Dennis Mannone.
As always, Scott Graves.
It's been wonderful to be here with you all. You are listening to the No Boundaries Radio Hour, and we broadcast on the UR Business Network.